Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Foster Files, a podcast about animal rescue and welfare. My name is Kelly, and every week I talk about issues surrounding animals in this country and to the people who are passionate about making their lives better. With me today is Ali Feldman Taylor, founder, president, and board member of Voters for Animal Rights. Voters for Animal Rights' mission is to help elect candidates who support animal protection, lobby for strong laws to stop animal cruelty, and hold elected officials in New York accountable to humane voters in the state. So, hi, how are you,
Hi.
Allie? It's such a pleasure to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're incredibly busy. You guys have a lot going on in your organization, so I very much appreciate the time.
Yeah, of course.
So I want you to tell me a little bit about Voters for Animal Rights. I see that you started it in 2016. Tell me about your journey there.
Worked in the on various political campaigns and for various, elected officials, pretty much like since the end of college. And I did that for a number of years, in like New York and Jersey and Florida and Ohio. And then I was starting to like kind of feel disillusioned with the process. And I decided that if I was going to stay in politics, I wanted it to be around issues that I really cared about, which was animal rights and still is to this day. And so for about 5 years, I worked on a campaign in New York City to ban horse carriages. And that was a really good learning process as to how the New York City Council operates, or doesn't operate at times, depending on what the issue is. And I decided that I wanted to start my own organization because I saw a need for political representation for animals and the people that care for them at the local and the state level. And so I created Voters for Animal Rights, and we launched in 2017, and we've taken off from there. We've been a volunteer led organization up until very recently. Like, I was working a day job while also running Voters for Animal Rights. Recently, we've grown, and so now I am full time at VFAR, which is super exciting. But yeah, we're kind of like a little engine that could, in that we've been able to get a lot of good laws passed with very little resources, just by making sure that we are hyper focused on local lobbying, and our core, mission. And yeah, that's us.
That's incredible. I mean, first of all, just that motivation to say, hey, I want to start this organization about this thing that I really care about in my state to do it. And then to get to the point where you can make it your full time job.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So, how do you grow to that point? Are you guys primarily like donation based?
So, I mean, that's something that's ever evolving, and that was, uh, um, we are great organizers at Voters for Animal Rights. Like, we're great at lobbying and, getting people to talk to their elected officials and moving, um, issues from bills into law. We're horrible fundraisers, which is which is why I've been there. I've been doing this at VFAR for 9 years, and I'm just now getting to a point where like I can pay myself like a small salary to do it. But yeah, most of our fundraising is through grants or just like small recurring donors. Um, but yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that one because like we're not great fundraisers, but we're really good at passing laws. So yeah, and I think that that's why our model has been successful, and that a lot of times when folks start an organization, understandably, the first thing that they focus on is fundraising. But for
Right.
us, we were like, well, let's just kind of build the plane while flying, and let's put fundraising on the back burner. And if we donate enough of our time, like, let's just see what we can get done. And then sometime down the line, we'll figure out if and when we're able to make a living doing this. Um, and so that's kept us going for about 9 years. But, once I had kids and everything, I was like, I can't keep doing, can't keep working a day job while also running VFAR. I need to do one or the other. So that's where we are.
That's incredible. First of all, self-awareness is half the battle. So
Yes.
if you know you've got a shortcoming, maybe you can now put yourself in a position to hire to fill that
Yeah.
shortcoming.
Really worked for us was that I came from a political background, and so I knew how the system worked in New York City. Um, and
Mhm.
so I was lucky in that I had that skill set, and I also had the connections from having worked in city politics for a while, and that was
Mhm.
incredibly helpful. So, like, we didn't have to hire a lobbyist for a lot of our campaigns. And then the people that, like, were working at VFAR with me also came from that same background, so that really helped. We weren't, like we weren't organizing it from scratch. Um,
Mhm.
Politics is kind of all about who you know and who your relationships are with, and so that's something that really helped us. Um, yeah.
Are you finding that, and this is just my curiosity more than anything, are
Yeah.
you finding that politicians maybe do care about some of these issues, but maybe they don't take action on them until they're sort of brought, like, into public attention?
I mean, it depends. There's some city council members who are just naturally really into animal rights. For example, there's a new council member. His name is Harvey Epstein. I know it's a very unfortunate name, but
It
he's a
is.
wonderful person. And he's vegan, and he has made animal rights issues, kind of a center of his platform. And he's the person that just started the Animal Welfare Caucus in the city council. Um, he's mostly driven by his own passion, and that's awesome. But that's not normally the case.
Mhm.
Then you have other council members who care deeply about animals, but they have a lot of other priorities, which I completely understand. They represent hundreds of thousands of
Right.
people. Then you have some council members who just aren't aware, and then you have the ones that just don't care. um,
Mhm.
but it is amazing, when we find what we find is when you have a council member who, like, personally really wants something to happen, it gets done like this, but that's just really rare. So, I find that unless advocates are doing the work themselves to educate council members on why they should support an issue and show them that lots of people in their district care about this and want them to take action on it, nothing happens without that type of interaction.
That's so interesting because I think, like, as a layperson, somebody who
Yeah.
is paying attention to what's going on in our country, but really doesn't know anything about politics, which I don't, um, you kind of think some of these things should be no-brainers, like,
Oh,
of
yeah.
course we care about animals, of course, of course we want this for animal welfare or whatever, but it's complex and it's low on the priority list sometimes, and then, of course, like you said, there are some people that it's not something that they care about, and so it's not
Yeah,
as forefront on the mind that you think it might be, which is obviously devastating. And I think everybody that I'm talking to on this podcast is really trying to advocate for legislation in their own little field. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with Rosemary Farm Sanctuary, which is in your state. It's a massive equine sanctuary, and they talk about legislating to make it so that we don't auction horses to Canada
yeah,
and Mexico for horse meat. And so it's just interesting how all these things you would think would be a priority, but it really, you know, things can't be a priority if everything's a priority.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk about one specific issue, and it's the reason that we connected. I think it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. You guys, your organization posted about what is going on with the increased presence of ICE in communities and how that can impact community pets and community
Mhm.
animals. And in that post, you had some tips for the people who might be concerned about being detained by ICE, and how to deal with that with their pets and how to think about their pets. And then you also had some tips for other community pet members who might be concerned for their neighbors. And so I just want to talk a little bit about that post and those tips that you have and sort of get that out there because I think when we're looking at some of these larger political issues and some of these other fights, we're not thinking about the unintended victims of these actions. So tell me a little bit about your perspective on that.
So at Voters for Animal Rights, we look at our issues holistically. Liberation for all means liberation for everybody, human and non human. Um, and I know there's the cliche, like, we are not free unless all of us are free. I mean, and that very much holds true here. Um, we consider ourselves a pretty progressive organization, and we've been horrified by what's been happening under the Trump administration. Um, and I think that sometimes in animal rights advocacy, folks can get a little bit, or not a little bit, folks can get pretty um, too focused just on non-human beings and kind of lose the ability to see how it's all interconnected with human rights as well. And I think that what's happening with ICE and how they're abducting people um, all over the country is a perfect example of that. Um, when people lose their homes, when humans lose their homes, animals lose their homes as well. Um, and I think, we kind of we want to challenge our followers to understand how these issues are interconnected. Um, and I think most of the people who see our content get that. We still get some comments from people being like, "Oh, well, they shouldn't have been here illegally." Well, what does that mean? How can a person be
Right.
illegal? That doesn't make any sense. Especially in the United States. None of us were born here. None of our ancestors were born here. We're all immigrants. And it's disappointing to hear those kinds of attitudes in the animal rights community sometimes, but um, I think it's important for organizations like ours to be proactive in having these types of conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a number of different people in animal care who say if we're not taking care of people, we can't take care of animals.
Yeah.
Those two things absolutely go hand in hand. So let's start with the individual. Somebody, I don't have a big following yet. I don't know if this is going to reach the right people, but if it did, if there was somebody that was worried that their family member or themselves might potentially be detained, and maybe some of the people that we're reaching would be maybe protesters that get arrested
Yeah.
or whatever, that could look like, because certainly those, quote unquote illegals that are being targeted are certainly not the only people that are being affected and that are being
Right.
impacted. So, what are some things that people should think about when it comes to their pets should they be detained? What kind of emergency plan would you recommend?
I mean, I think preparation is key. And it's unfortunate that we even have to have this conversation. Um,
Mhm,
but choosing a trusted person, whether that's a friend or a family member or even a neighbor, um, who you can reach out to and see if they would be willing to temporarily take care of your companion animals in case something happens. Um, if you don't have anybody that's local to you, see if you could reach out to local animal rescues, churches, other faith-based organizations, particularly mutual aid groups, are terrific at this, and ask what kind of support they might have. Make sure that your animal has their information updated, make sure that they're microchipped, and not just that they're microchipped, but that you register the microchip. A lot of folks don't realize that once you get your pet
mhm,
microchip, doesn't mean anything unless you actually register it to your name and your contact info in case somebody finds
mhm.
them. Um, and also, like, have an emergency go-to bag that has, your pet's food type, especially if they have some type of allergies or any type of medical condition. Make sure you have that easily documented and put together in an emergency kit.
And that's good advice all around, right? We don't have to be worried about whether or not our community is impacted by ice. We had a bunch of storms roll through the Midwest. You guys had a massive snowstorm, what,
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, roughly, I think?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, about 2 weeks ago. So these are important, these are important reminders for everyone, really, but obviously for anybody that is concerned about being forcefully taken from their home, it's even more of a concern. What about other community members? What about the people who, you know, aren't worried about being detained but care about the people in the community? How can they help?
I think it's important that organizations like animal shelters, rescues, mutual aid groups have open conversations about what their capacity is and making sure that the word is getting out about what they are able to offer as a service to folks who may be getting detained. Um, and I think working within their communities to figure out what the most effective way is. So I think it's important for animal shelters, rescue organizations, independent rescuers, mutual aid groups to have conversations about what services they are able to provide and how they can adapt their services to help those who are in these most challenging situations.
Mhm.
I think it's also important that they have a communications plan that is led by those most affected, on what the best way is to get that information out without making people feel, that they're going to be, uh, unsafe or outed or whatever it may be, or
Mhm.
putting them in further danger. Um, that might mean putting your materials in different languages, which is something that we at VFAR, learned very quickly, right? Like we put up our post about ICE in English and then immediately numerous people were like, you need to have this in other languages. And we were like, oh, duh, of course we
Yeah.
should. Makes
Yeah.
total
Yeah.
sense. Like, how did we not
Yeah.
think of this? Um,
Yeah.
but it was that reliance from, folks who have this lived experience of being an undocumented person, sharing that with us that let us know, hey, there's a better way to go about this. Of course, we immediately took their suggestions and got it translated and posted right away. But I think having like an openness and a willingness to pivot quickly on what is most impactful is a good way to go. Um, I think, if veterinary offices can afford it, providing, free or low cost veterinary care, spay neuter, vaccines, microchipping, boarding would be huge if veterinary offices or doggy daycares or um, pet sitters would be willing to provide that. I think those are really impactful ways that folks can step up during this really awful time.
Right, because, it's going to be challenging for somebody who has an animal that maybe isn't fixed, isn't vaccinated, isn't properly, you know, microchipped. It's going to be difficult for them to say, "Hey, can you take my animal into this boarding
Yeah.
facility, or can you take my animal into your home?" Like, I can't bring a dog into my home that isn't fixed. I can't bring a dog into my home that isn't vaccinated. As much as I would want to help, I'm not in a position to. So, if we can kind of get ahead of that as well, get prepared to make your dog receivable, or your companion animal receivable as well, and anybody that can educate in the community to help with that. Um, that's also really helpful. And for maybe an individual who is, apprehensive about fostering, or maybe only wants to do it on a temporary basis, maybe go to your local shelter and say, "Hey, if somebody, if an animal was brought in that has a home, but their owner was taken away, I can temporarily hang on while that gets all sorted out." And maybe you would be in a position to just have that animal for a couple hours, or a couple days, or a couple weeks. So yeah, those are all really, really great tips.
I think too, remembering that bathrooms can be lifesavers for animals, especially in New York City where most folks live in pretty tiny apartments. One thing that we hear all the time
Hmm.
is, "Oh, I couldn't foster a dog because I already have a dog," or "I couldn't have that cat in here because they're not fixed yet." Well, if you have a bathroom, you can foster an animal. We do that in New
Yeah.
York City all the time. Animal does not care if they're staying in the bathroom for a few nights. They just care that they're safe and warm and being fed, and that they're in, a safe space. So, we always say, if you think you can't foster, like, yes, you can.
I
Um,
love that attitude of
yep.
just open up your home, and
Yeah.
you might be surprised. You might
I
be
can't tell
surprised.
you how many times my husband has come home and opened the bathroom and there's a cat in there that he didn't know was there before. And I'm just like, Sorry.
I mean, I don't know. I think I gotta side. You gotta at least give the man some warning. You know
Mm,
what I mean? If there's gonna be a being in his bathroom, you gotta give him a heads up
easier
on
to
it.
easier to ask, what is it they say? Easier to ask forgiveness
That
than it is to
the
ask permission.
permission.
Yeah.
That's funny.
And I think another thing I would flag, let me start over. Something else that I would flag is I think that during this really difficult time, I think that we as rescuers need to sort of like put our swords down on judgment around people. A lot of times in the rescue community,
Mm,
I'll hear people saying like, "Oh my god, that person, just let their dog out and just abandon them on the street." Well, you don't know why that happened, right? So
mhm,
if you want people to work with you, like, you have to leave your judgment at the door, right? Like, nobody wants to just abandon their animal. Nobody wants to give them up to a shelter. But when they're in, a life or death situation, which an ice raid is, sometimes they
mhm.
have to make that awful choice. And I think so, like, really taking a step back and suspending the type of judgment that we see a lot in the rescue community is important.
Right, right. I love that. I love that idea of just don't set the judgment aside, help the
Mhm.
people, help the animal, and
Yep.
understand that um we're not in uncharted territory because these things have happened in other times in our history, which is why it's so kind of concerning that we're not learning from our mistakes. But what we do know when these things happen, especially when they happen on a really large scale, is that communities and neighbors need to open up doors for neighbors. And that's the only way that we're going to get through this and
Definitely.
get on the other side of these things is by opening doors for our neighbors. So I wanted to ask you, you and I spoke before the recording started, and your organization has a lot of legislative agenda
Mhm.
that they're working on. So thank goodness they have you full time now because there's a lot going on at VFAR. So can you just hit on a couple of those topics? Because Ali has graciously agreed to come on to the podcast again and we'll dive into another legislative topic. But I want to hear a little bit more and kind of tease out for people what other things you guys are working on.
Sure. So, we have a city level agenda, which goes through the New York City Council, and then we have a state level agenda that goes through the New York State Senate and the Assembly. At the state level, which is currently our biggest priority because the New York State legislature is only in session from January until June of this year, and then they adjourn until next winter. Um, So we work on legislation at the city level through the New York City Council and at the state level through the New York State Assembly and Senate. Right now, our primary focus is on the New York State legislature because they're only in session January through June. And if bills don't pass by this June, then we have to start the whole process over next winter. So, our two big priorities at the state level are one, legislation that would preemptively prohibit industrial octopus farming in New York State. And then the other is legislation that would prohibit the use of glue traps in any state owned or leased building. Um, the octopus bill is an important one in that right now there is an international seafood company called Nueva Pesca Nova that has been pouring millions into research and development to try and figure out how to farm octopus in captivity. Um, the octopus that you would get at a restaurant or a grocery store, that's wild caught, but they're trying to figure
Mhm.
out how to essentially like create tanks and grow them in multi-story buildings. I certainly don't eat octopus or any type of seafood. Um, and the idea that they could be creating an entire new way of factory farming and torturing another species of animals is horrifying to us. So New York State, along with Jersey, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, and a few other states all have legislation that would prohibit something that doesn't yet exist in the United States. Washington and California have already banned this as well, because we want to send a message that we don't want this coming here. And, sometimes we get pushback from folks saying, why are you trying to ban something that doesn't happen? And my answer to that is, have you ever tried to ban a practice that's already got an economy around it? Look
Right.
at
And already making
every,
money and
yep,
already getting tax money and pushing lobbying and all. Yeah.
mhm,
Funding politicians. Yeah. That's
exactly.
an
Look at
impossibility.
how hard it was just to pass the puppy mill pipeline bill in New York State. That took over 10 years. We
Hmm.
still have traveling circuses that are illegal in New York. Why? Because there's an economy around it, because there's a lot of
Hmm.
money around it. Um, there has been very little, if any, progress around pigs, chickens, cows, and more in the factory farming industry. Why? Because it's a, multi-billion dollar, if not trillion
It's
dollar
massive.
industry.
Right.
So our strategy is that if we can prevent a practice from ever becoming a thing and prevent these animals from ever even being born into a system of being born just for the purpose of being killed, that's the strategy that we're going to need to take going forward, and prevent the suffering of millions of octopus before it even starts. So, that's where we are in that bill. And then glue traps, um, I'm sure you probably know what they are. They're adhesive-based
Hmm.
traps.
They're
Um,
awful.
they're awful, and they aren't just harmful to rodents. Household pets can get caught in them. Most often, wildlife can get caught in them. They're incredibly harmful to birds, and they provide a Band-Aid for a problem without getting to the source. So what we find is that landlords use them as a way to say, "Hey, I'm doing something about the rodent problem," but they're really not,
Hmm.
right? If you have
Hmm.
rodents in your building, it's because they have access to your building, so you need to figure out how they're getting into your building in the first place. If you just put down
Hmm.
glue traps, that doesn't address how they're getting in. It means that your space is warm and it's safe and it has a food source and it's a good place for rodents to raise their young, right? They're there because it's
Hmm.
welcoming and comfortable for them. So we need landlords and building managers to, instead of, you know, playing whack-a-mole with glue traps, to actually do the work of preventing infestations in the first place through plugging up holes in their buildings, having good trash management, right? Those are the ways that you prevent rodent infestations. Um, so those are our two big ones at the state level. And then at the New York City Council level, we're working on a bill that would prohibit the sale of birds in pet stores. Um, the birds that you see in pet stores are either taken from the wild or they were bred in mass in mills in other states. Mills, just like you can imagine with a puppy mill, they have those for birds. They're
Hmm.
awful.
Yep.
Um, so that's going to be coming up soon. And then we are also working on a budget push right now to try and get the city to fund free and low cost spay neuter that isn't means tested and is available to anybody who needs it. And we're also pushing them to start a pet food pantry pilot program in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, where there are the highest needs. There's a lot more that we're working on as well, but those are kind of the big ones for
Hmm.
right now.
That's amazing. You guys
Thanks.
are really just really doing the incredible legislative work. And I am so excited to get to know you and meet you and talk to you. And so I want to ask you the question that I ask everybody that comes on the podcast. What is the one thing that you wish everybody knew about animal welfare? When you
Hmm.
talk to somebody at a party or you meet somebody for the first time and they ask what you do for a living and you have that 30-second soapbox to really preach something to hit something home that's important to you, what's that one thing you say that's important?
Um, I think the way that I want folks to think about animal rights is around consent and bodily autonomy. Um, we talk about that a lot as humans and in how we treat each other, but it seems to be forgotten when it comes to animals. Um, so I try to frame it that way, in that when people say like, "Well, why?" Like, um, I mean, I try to remind people that animals should have the same choices that we have. Like people will say to me like, "Well, why don't you support, um, you know, horseback riding?" And I'll say, "Well, they can't consent to it, right? Like you're not asking them." Or I mean, any number of horrible things that folks do to animals. Like they didn't ask for that. They didn't consent to it. They don't have a choice in the matter. So why is it okay? Um, and I think, sometimes people look at me like, okay, hippie. But sometimes it kind of challenges them
Yeah.
to think a little bit differently.
Well, I think what kind of and I totally understand what you're saying, but what makes me sad about what you're saying is just that we haven't figured that out for human beings yet.
Yeah.
I mean, true, like, and certainly I don't want you to stop your mission or not be hopeful for your mission because I'm hopeful for your mission. But geez, we're missing the mark for people,
Yeah.
so it doesn't, I don't know, it makes it even harder for animals.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I love it. I love that you gave us something to think about because I think that even if you just think about it from a basic household standpoint, what does your companion pet want to do? What are you asking them to do that they're not consenting to? And let's maybe look a little bit more into that and think a little bit
Yeah.
more about the animals that we're impacting
I
on
mean,
a
I
daily
think
basis.
a good example is with fishing. People are like, "Oh, well, I do catch and release." And I'm like, "Did that fish consent to having a hook in their mouth and being ripped out of the water?" I don't think so.
Right.
Um, and with companion animals, I get pushback and that folks are like, "Well, the dog didn't consent to, being spayed or neutered." But I would argue that, like, we as human beings have an obligation to do that because it's a means of preventing suffering. Like, I don't have 3 cats because I absolutely needed to have 3 cats. I have 3 cats because there's dozens of cats in my block that were coming to my home and
Yeah.
needed help. Um, these are all human-made problems, that we've
Mhm.
created.
Yeah, we really have. So I appreciate that you guys are doing the work to try to solve any of those problems that you can in your state. That's
Yeah,
really incredible. And that's inspiring. It really is.
thanks.
So at the end of each episode, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen, but we do something called the Foster Spotlight. And I don't know if there's a particular organization that you had a particular animal that you wanted to talk about, but just in case you didn't, I did pull up an animal from Animal Care Centers of New York City,
Great.
if you're comfortable with me talking about that animal.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. So I'm going to share my screen. That way, if anybody is following along on YouTube, they can actually see the animal that we're talking about today. So last night, my husband and I watched The Princess Bride again.
Oh,
And so I know. So as a result, when I was looking through animals to talk about today, I immediately saw Buttercup and I was like, that's it. That's who I gotta talk about today. So look at this meatball face. I mean, he is such a
oh my gosh.
handsome, handsome boy. So Buttercup, for those listening, is at the Animal Care Centers of New York City. And he's actually in foster and has been in care with them for 76 days. So Buttercup is 6 years old. He's a male. He's definitely a bully of some kind, pit, American Staffordshire Terrier, whatever bully breed you want to call it. But here's what I love about Buttercup's profile. He wants to be by your side all the time. The fosters are constantly having to move his bed from room to room so he can be right next to us. Not to bother, just for company. He's a total couch potato. He's alone 8 hours a day and sleeps the whole time. So if you do happen to be catching this in New York City and you live in an apartment and you want a lazy dog to just spend some time with and spend your life with and hang out with you, this guy is gonna be your guy. So, if you're a Princess Bride fan, like my husband and I are, and you are looking for a companion, I encourage you to check out Buttercup. And as always, his profile will be linked in the show notes so that you can connect with Buttercup.
Let's get
But
Buttercup
Allie,
home.
I know, let's get Buttercup a home. He's so handsome, isn't he?
He's
So,
adorable.
Allie, I wanted to thank you so much for your time today. And I want to thank you for hopefully the further conversations that we'll have where we can talk about some of these legislative issues and we can talk about how people can get involved in their state. Because I would really love to learn how to be more impactful in my own state of Pennsylvania. So thank you so much for your time. Why don't you tell people how they can find your organization?
You can find us on sorry, back up and cut that. You can find us on the web at vfar.org. You can also find us on social media. We're on Instagram at Voters for Animal Rights and all the other social media channels as well. But Instagram's probably the best.
Awesome. Awesome. And again, I'll be connecting with you. I've already connected with you guys on Instagram, so I'll be tagging this in the clips for the episode. But I really appreciate your time today. You guys are doing incredible work. And I love that you just decided that you wanted to make a difference and you put your mind to it. You did it. That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. And everyone, remember, you can follow the show at the Foster Files Podcast on Instagram. You can find us now on YouTube at the Foster Files Podcast. And if there's somebody that I should be talking to, like Allie, you can make sure to email me at the Foster Files Podcast at gmail.com. But I just want to remind everybody, be kind to yourselves and be kind to animals. Have a great day.